Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Osa. Welcome back to another episode of the Power of Design podcast. In today's episode of the Power of Design, I will be talking to Cassmer Ward. Cass is a serial entrepreneur, business owner, public accountant, speaker, and author. With more than 20 years of experience as a financial executive and owner of a structural engineering firm, Cass and I discuss the basic structure and purpose of business and profits. I learned so much from this episode and know that the Power of Design audience will find a plethora of insights and knowledge to take your career and business to the next level. This is my conversation with Cass. Cass, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Cass, I know you are an entrepreneur with more than 20 years of experience as a financial executive and business leader. What is the single most important aspect of a business owner should focus in order to be successful?
Okay. Well, the single most important focus should be not to have a single most important focus.
Good answer.
However, you can't do everything. So you really got to break down your model into how do you make money? What is the value proposition you're delivering for your product, for your service, and how can you get an economic return on that? Understanding that piece first can help you decide and put together the pieces of everything else. An entrepreneur really should know a little bit about everything and not a lot about one thing in particular.
Yeah. Why do you think most business owners don't know that? Because, we typically, we go to school, we learn a craft, we become good at doing something, and then we want to start a business. How come nobody tell you that information?
Well, everybody wants to fast forward to the success. So there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that will go into any business. There will be money lost. There will be bad decisions and mistakes made. And even by the time the success hits, it can be bittersweet. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of trial and error that goes into it. What they don't teach you in school is patience. Sometimes it feels like you just need to be doing something. In school, you read a chapter, you take a test, you read another chapter, you take a test, you write a paper, you're constantly doing work for progression.
Yeah.
In building a business, of course, you're always working on your business, but sometimes people get in their own way and they feel like just doing work is the end all be all. It means like, well, just because the phone's not ringing, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to change this. I'm going to rework everything I've put in the last year. And really, that's not necessary. It really should have been, I've built the company, the machine, the processes, the way they should to be successful.
Yeah.
I've just got to give them time to work themselves through and to prove themselves. And
Sure.
Sometimes they're not picture perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes they need to be reworked.
Yeah. Tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up?
Well, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, but we moved to the Charlotte area when I was 11. I ended up going to school at UNC Charlotte, and I ended up getting a degree in accounting. I started my career in one of the larger banks here in town, and it taught me a lot. It taught me, I got to be several different areas around the bank, but I realized the work that I was doing versus the impact I wanted to make it didn't connect.
Yeah.
And sometimes I felt like I was working just for the sake to prove that I was working, not to get things done. Here's the thing. Large companies they're great places to work. My mold did not fit their mold. Yeah. So I just decided I needed to find something, for myself that was maybe outside of that. Maybe something a little bit I wanted the security of a large company, but I also wanted a little bit more freedom to actually make changes.
Yeah.
So from there, I actually received a job offer for a company to be a CFO for a small engineering, construction, and real estate development company.
Okay.
Spent several years there, built it from less than $1 million in revenue company to a $25 million a year revenue company. And from there, it was like, well, I've learned how to make a difference. I've learned how to make an impact. I also started to see a company become bigger than it, was when I started. And it was time for me to move on to the next thing. And from there, I left that company, and a couple engineers said, well, we want to do our own boutique engineering firm. Let's start up a company together and we'll get going. So that was 14, almost 15 years ago. We started Intelligent Design Engineering. And it was a great experience. It really was like, how do we come up with a company name? How do we register for the Secretary of State and get a federal ID number? So it really was like, how do we make a company?
Sure.
I, as an accountant, as somebody who always is measuring the risk versus the reward, I would always tell somebody, don't start your own company. There's way too much risk. There's too much work. It's not worth the reward. It's, and here I am starting a company with my 3 other partners. Here's the worst thing that could have happened. Everything went great. We made our money back within 6 months. We're profitable. And it was everything I wanted it to be. And I said, well, now we have a foundation. Let's grow this company.
Yeah.
And my partners at the time, they just weren't ready to do that. They were engineers. They wanted to be engineers. They didn't want to manage. They didn't want to do sales. They didn't want to train. So they said, we're just going to keep doing this. And I said, well, we can't build a company with that mentality. And in that type of capacity, I didn't have a 40-hour-a-week job. So I said, why don't you guys let me do this for other companies? I'll still do it for here, but you don't need me for the entire time.
Yeah.
So that's when I started working as a fractional CFO for other companies.
Okay.
All the way from startup to $50 million in revenue. So I early on, it was much smaller companies. As I've done this now myself for 13 years, it's been, I've worked with companies all over a range of that to 75 million.
Sure.
Revenue.
How was that dynamic with engineers, getting to agree on decisions, making sure we all have the same approach, mindset, objectives? Because, I work a lot with engineers and they have a very specific way of thinking,
They really do. I will tell you, there were times I knew I had the right partners, but I also thought I might kill them at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was, engineers want to understand everything to a level that doesn't create additional value, but their brains can't work.
That's a really good quote.
Yeah, until they can't do it until their brains understand every individual point.
Yeah.
And there's times that you can spend on one point that you're not adding value, but it's just to get them to work. So here's what's funny is engineers work in number and accountants work in numbers.
Sure.
You'd think that there'd be a natural collaboration that just works wonders, and it didn't. We were bumping heads left and right. And what I realized was the way they made calculations for physics and for all the engineering work they were doing and the set of rules that are behind accounting and finance, they were different. And they didn't want to know what the numbers were. They wanted to understand the mechanics of the numbers.
Yes.
At the same time, they wanted to argue with the mechanics of the number. And to the level of, then they started missing the impact of investing in marketing, investing in better equipment, investing in better office space, things like that. So what happened was we'd have these very simple decisions that need to be made, and we would just go around in circles and circles, which really would prevent us from ever making a decision. And over the course of time, it taught me how not to deliver numbers, but to explain numbers and what their impact and what was impacting them.
Yes.
And it really made me a better communicator more than anything.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I felt like before I went in to make these presentations, I was more of a communications or just a writer in general, because I would have to figure out the 3 steps or the 3 sentences I needed to say to deliver the number to them so they would understand it and it would ultimately answer their questions before they were asked.
Yeah. And I think what you were doing, without realizing, it's you were putting yourself in their shoes and explaining things in their terms.
Yes.
So they will value your what you're saying because they're hearing what they had, where they put their value on things.
Yes.
And that, that is branding.
Yeah.
That's marketing. When you talk to your client in their terms and you help them understand how what you're doing is helping them.
Correct.
And that's, in the brand design work that I do, and even in the architecture world, what I'm really selling is I'm helping my clients move from a place of complexity to simplicity, uncertainty to certainty, and confusion to clarity.
Yeah.
Once you move somebody to that other place, everybody wants to be there.
Right.
And anybody will pay millions just to get there because, complexity is very easy.
Yeah.
Being overwhelmed or confused, you don't have to do anything to get there. Just by default, we always get to that point.
And once you have clarity, once you have an understanding, once you have all that, the next step, and if you've done that part of providing confidence, letting the things that don't matter go comes naturally. You can say, we really don't need to spend time on these things.
Yes.
But sometimes, as I mentioned, with just doing work for the sake of work, so many business owners, so many management teams, so many just managers in general, and it goes down to the employees, no different than when I was working in corporate America. They feel that more work equals value.
Correct.
And that's just not always the case.
Yeah.
There are times where it most certainly is the case, but it's not a one size fits all. You really got to figure out, where am I creating the most value for every effort I put into this?
Yes, and I will think that we're a society of workaholics, and I think it's the most common addiction. Is just it's condemning that, because when you ask somebody, how are you doing? Like, oh man, working 60 hours weeks, 60-hour week. And it looks like a badge of honor. Like, oh my God, man, you're good, man. Like you're a good worker, without realizing that the price you're paying is you're neglecting your family, your relationships, your own health. But it's common to see it. Yeah. And I would think that it's a product of probably baby boomer generation and before that industrial revolution, that all the product that was created was based on, labor and creating the value was created through labor.
Yeah.
What I love about technology today is what we're realizing, that you can leverage technology to provide the same or more value without having the amount of actual, work or labor that you need to put into it to make things work.
Right. And that's the other thing, is when you have that flexibility, when you have that mindset, you're constantly growing. If you get caught up in the mundane of just doing something for the sake of doing it, there is no room for growth, because you're always just accomplishing a task for the sake of getting the task done. So if you have 10 tasks due every day and you're going to spend your entire day working on those tasks, well, you are very successful at getting those tasks done.
Sure.
If you figure a way to get all those tasks done with 1 hour, to leave yourself 7 free hours, even if you just sit on your rear end for those 7 hours, you've accomplished the same amount of work.
Yeah.
And we feel we fear, now I'm in judgment because I have those 7 hours. Well, use those 7 hours. Use 2 of those hours and do something creative. Add more value. Look for other projects. I mean, that's where growth comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the root of the problem starts with, we grow in a society where you're defined by what you do. So since you're very little, what are you going to be when you grow up? Yeah. Right? It's all about what do you do. And then we get into this point where we think that work is our identity.
Yeah.
Work is what we do, is not who we are. But when we meet somebody, it's like, oh yeah, this is my name. What do you do? I'm an architect. I'm an accountant. I'm a lawyer. Like we immediately attach meaning of who we are with what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why we do meaningless tasks, because it's like, if my identity is I'm an architect, there, as long as I'm doing architectural tasks, then that's who I am.
Yeah.
And part of not doing that is where you need to be, satisfied and confident with who you are, not with what you do.
Yeah.
And that might even go deeper to, self-doubt and not having enough confidence.
Yeah.
Failing and thinking that I'm a failure. No, I fail in these tasks.
Yes.
But we said I am a failure.
Yeah.
You cannot identify with what you're doing.
Right. Well, the other piece that I would say has contributed to the successes I've had over the past few years, I'd like to say it's confidence, but there's one thing I'm always confident in, and it's the things that I don't know. And the fact that I can identify what I don't know that's value that it is needed for a certain problem or project, but I can identify those with confidence, makes it so much easier to create a path to complete a project, to solve a problem. So many people, when they get to that uncertainty, they get lost in it. Well, how will we know? What will we know? Well, we don't know, but so because we don't know these three things, these are the risks. It could be great, average, horrible. What happens if it's horrible? Well, we can live with that risk. Yeah. Or, oh my God, if it's horrible, we can't live with that risk. We've got to pause for right now.
Yeah.
But some people are just like, well, we can't do anything until we know more. You can. I mean,
sure.
Here's the other thing. I'm also very confident in making mistakes. Sometimes, whether it's a project, whether it was a company, I'm like, if we go in and this doesn't work, I'm okay with that.
Sure.
If this company does not last and I've put a big chunk of money into it, I would rather have that money back, but it's not going to break the bank. I'm not going to invest more than I'm willing to lose.
Yeah.
I will do it for the learning experience. I will do it, I'm hoping for success from it, but it's not one of those things that I sit in fear of failure that would hold me back. Yeah. But again, it's also willing to only risk what I'm willing to lose. I would never say, let's put $1 million into a company and I know it's going to work. If it doesn't, I'm going to lose everything. But I would never go that route. Yeah. I would say, this is what I'm willing to lose. Let's go forward. Let's scale it up till it's a multi-million-dollar company.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast this week and I don't remember who it was, but they said, in business, all profit comes from risk.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I really do. Yeah. There is some level of risk you're taking. And even if it's not a monetary risk, there is time, effort, relationships, all of that come from it. And even great profits, I mean, there's no little risk in high reward opportunities. I mean, when they're gobbled up, they're gone. I mean, if they all were, we'd all be millionaires at this point. So there is some risk that's taken in. There is, and let's talk about not just the risk. What does risk mean? Oh,
that's a good one.
Risk, we always are like, well, the risk of failing. Right?
Yeah.
But there's also got to be skin in the game. I mean, some people are like, well, the risk is this may not work, but I'm not going to put money in to do that. So you took no risk. If it didn't work, you've lost nothing.
Yeah.
What are the stakes tied to that risk?
Yeah.
So yes, I do agree that for the sake of profit, that risk is always involved.
Well, and even the opportunity cost, not doing something is also a huge risk.
Yeah.
To me, one of the things that I thought about when I was working still as an architect, and I had a great job, great company, everything was really good, no complaints. But I had the desire in my heart to do something, and I tried to kind of avoid it. And you're fine, let's stay here and retire. Yeah. But it got to the point where I had to do it. I could not ignore that anymore.
Yeah.
And to me, the biggest thing, the risk of not trying or not experiencing what it was like to have my own business, to take the risk, to bet on my ideas, on my potential. Yeah. It was too big of a risk not to do it.
Yeah.
Now that it's been 4 years, man, I feel amazing. Best decision I made in my life. I've grown so much. That's the other thing about going back to, business ownership. To me, being a business owner forced me to become a better person.
Yes.
And it's an accelerated process. Like, I cannot risk to be the same person I was a year ago.
Right.
Because the price is too high to pay. And I'm forced to become better, to learn, to adjust, to learn when to say no, to recognize where I'm overextending myself. Yeah. And to me, that process of, advance and growth is one of the most rewarding things I've experienced about owning my own business.
Right. And with that, you've identified the risk and rewards of just your time by yourself. It makes you a much more productive person, or able to identify where happiness fits in.
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
Tell me about your business today. So you're a fraction of CFO, you work with other companies. Who else do you work with, and what exactly is your role?
So I work with companies of all type of industries. So it's very hard. We live in a society that everybody gets put in a box. So I'm an architect and I work in commercial retail architecture, and that's it.
Sure.
Or I'm an engineer and I work in, multi-residential. I mean, everything gets very specific. With accounting, I work in tax or I work in audit. Like, everybody has their specialties. Well, what happens at the CFO level for chief financial officers is, whether the company's a large multi-billion-dollar company or it's a small mom and pop's company, a CFO is a part of the leadership team. They're part of management. They are part of the board of directors. They are helping the leadership team execute their strategy to create shareholder value. Yeah. And sometimes the shareholder value are the managers that are sitting at the table with you. Sometimes it's shareholders. Sometimes it's a private equity firm. But there's that leadership role that needs to be played. And we have chief operating officers, chief marketing officers, the chief executive officer.
Yeah.
Well, the CFO is no different. Their background is going to be in finance and accounting.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of companies, especially those that are less than $25 million, they don't all need a full-time CFO. Sometimes they like them. Sometimes they like the fact that they're going to be there in their seat 40 hours a week. I have found that if you have a great accounting team and a great finance team, as long as you can keep them running with the help of a CFO, the CFO should be free enough to help with strategy and operational development, how to find a way to make the company create more value within the company itself and for the shareholders. So from there, I've realized that a lot of companies, they only need several hours a week to help build their companies.
Yeah.
And what's funny is people say, oh, well, what industry? It doesn't matter what industry.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what size company. It's all business concepts. And we throw all of that out the window. So I talked to you before how everybody gets so specialized.
Yeah.
They get so specialized, they forget the basic concepts of business. They've read some article in Forbes. They've read something in the Wall Street Journal or The Economist of some weird business model based on derivatives or based on creating a loss leader to drive customer retention against the cost of acquisition. And they're like, oh, we're going to do that. They completely throw out the window, are we going to be profitable? Can we make money per customer, let alone be profitable at all? Mm-hmm. I work in that space of let's bring these concepts together and make sure all the specialties, all those little details are being fulfilled by our team. But let's make sure once they're all done that they're still making sure that there's value at the top.
Sure. Yeah, there is a good definition of business that I use. I don't know where I get it from, which is, business is the exchange of money for a product or service. Mm-hmm. That's business. Yep. You're not talking yet if you're profitable or not, but to be in business, you have to do that.
Exactly.
And that's one thing that sometimes when I talk to people and they're like, oh my God, I have this idea, I think it's going to be a good business. I always say, well, it doesn't matter what you're selling, but go and exchange something, a product or service for money in the marketplace. Yeah. You can exchange shoes and then exchange bicycles and then exchange services. It doesn't matter as long as you're getting good at the exchange. Yeah. Now, eventually with that exchange, after that happens, you want to keep some money in your pocket. And then the more you exchange, the more money you keep in your pocket. Right. But that's one of those things that is not very common. It's common sense, but it's not common knowledge.
Right. And then executing it to make an impact. That's a bigger piece. It's hard, and I won't say this in the fractional CFO, COO, fractional executive area, but it is with so many consultants. They go in and they come up with an idea or a concept, and they're spot on. But Jack, you need to increase sales. You need to increase your margins. Okay. Well, that's great, and that's not wrong. So let's focus in on that. And then they'll be like, okay, you go work on that. I'll come back in another week. It's like, well, okay, I need some help applying the concepts. Where do I start? And that doesn't mean that the executive team should be in there doing everything themselves, but sometimes they've got to create that path to success for their sales team, for their accounting team, for their marketing team. They have to lay all that out. They don't have to actually do the work, but you can't just throw a concept out to your employees and to your team and just say, get it done. Yeah. And we do live in a society where like, oh, success means getting it done. Well, give a path to getting it done. That's what leaders do. Yeah, to facilitate the road to get there to that goal. Yeah, going back to your point about the specialization, that's one of the things that I think about a lot because, I come from Colombia. It's a, different culture, different country. And, I have a lot of friends that are architects down there. In Colombia, you're an architect, and then you're like, okay, you know how to do buildings. Like, yeah. And you may do one building type more than the other one, but nobody's going to take away the value you're bringing because you haven't done, a school, but you're an architect, Right. By default, it's a building. People are going to use it. Of course, there's some things that are special about that. You research about it. You hire consultants to help you achieve it. And that's one of the biggest difference I've seen, at least culturally, between where I'm from to where I am today in the United States. Because here, they want you to fit in that box. Yep. Everybody wants you to fit the box. Okay, what type of building you do? Okay. Oh, you have never done a church? Then, no, I'm looking for a church architect. Right. Like, they don't believe that you can do other things, even if they're aligned with what you know how to do. Yeah. And I think a lot about that. And I think by default, we tend to overimpose on others our limitations. So if I couldn't do something, then no, you can't either. So to me, one of the biggest frustrations I had was the inability within the corporate America system to exercise my own potential, right? Because even when I was an architect, then there are types of architects. Your project architect, or your project designer, or your interior designer, or you write specifications. So even there are niches within the niches. Right. And there's a lot of comfort in putting everybody in a niche. When I'm in a niche, so I expect others to be there. Mm-hmm. Even,
the potential that we have as humans is amazing.
Yeah.
Our brain, our ideas, our soul, we can be artistic, we can be creative, we can be good with numbers. But I feel that, call it society or the system, since we entered the school system, their job is to take away from you the certainty and belief that you have unlimited potential, and that is you have the right and even the duty to exercise it when you're an adult.
Yes, you're 100% correct, and it's stifling. And we think, we are bound by a set of rules, but it also stifles creativity. And whether it's architecture, whether it's the arts, whether it's engineering, accounting, marketing, creativity breeds innovation.
Yeah, and I think it's just the belief that you have it and you can do it. Yeah. I believe every single human being is a creative person. But we tend to confuse creativity with artistic expression. So we think, because they have artistic abilities, then they're creative, but I'm not. I hear that all the time. Oh yeah, can you do this? No, I'm not creative. Yeah. Of course you're not if you believe you're not.
Right.
Once you believe it, you start exercising it, you practice it, you get better. Yeah. There are many things that are consequences of things that we've been taught. We assume those are reality in our lives, and therefore they become because we act like it.
Yeah.
Tell me about the future of your business, yourself. How do you see yourself in the next, let's say, 10 years?
Well, here's where I'm at. I like to do a whole lot of everything. So over the years, what happened is I took a part-time role with Intelligent Design.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, one of the owners said, I'm going to be 40 in a few years and I want to grow this.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm actually doing the CFO work with them that I've been doing with all these other companies, and we've built it to be, from 4 of us, now there's 15 of us. So nice. Now we're a much, much larger company. And for the niche we're in, we're one of the largest companies in the United States that does structural residential engineering.
Sure.
So that's a huge piece of me, that a part of my time and heart that goes into, because I loved building that, because that's something that's my own. It's like my first child. I've also had, oddly enough, the things I learned building my CFO business, I was able to apply to the engineering group, but I've never spent time building my CFO business, because it's always just been me.
Sure.
In the last 6 months, I've brought in 2 new CFOs. I've hired some admin staff. Now I'm actually taking the advice I've been giving to other companies for so many years. Nice. Which has been very rewarding. Like it's, I've taken some risks with it. So now I split I have the time I spend between, the client base I have and building my own company for consulting with the engineers. But I love to have a creative endeavor at least every couple of years. As we originally met, I have an entrepreneurial video series that I like to do 10 episodes every year. Yeah. 1 year ago, I released a book. 2 years ago, I wrote it. It was just released 1 year ago. But now that 2 years have gone by, I'm like, well, what's that next creative project? Sure. And it may not be in business. It may be in business. I don't know. But now I'm starting to get that itch. So I love being able to work in those areas, and what comes out of those creative, like writing a book or those interviews, always sparks an idea of how can I be better for engineers, for CFOs, for my clients, and do those things. So, and it also culminates with, I also teach entrepreneurship and managerial accounting as an adjunct at Queen's University in their MBA program. And I love that learning environment. I love when education can be delivered in a very special way, in a way that people talk about it for 10 years. Oh, I remember learning that. Yeah. I mean, you talked about the education system. We churn people through, you learn something, you throw it out by the time you take the test and you're done. I've loved being able to relay my experiences to the students in my class. Yeah. That it's actually teaching me more on how I engage with other business leaders. Yeah. And sometimes, whether we're in we may be in a board setting, that it ends up becoming a classroom setting because we're all learning from each other.
Right. What do you think makes you good at what you do?
I do a lot of listening. It's funny because sometimes it makes a lot of the companies I work with awkward because I will just go in and listen without saying very much. And if you let somebody talk long enough, the truth eventually comes out. And asking uncomfortable questions. I was with a client today where we were, doing an operational assessment of a production facility. And I let them my client was running through all their employees and their questions. And at the very last 2 minutes, they're like, anything you want to ask? And I said, what's the one thing you really hate about coming to work in this job right now? And they're like, well, I hate working with this machine because it's so far away here and we need to do this. And like everything that came out in that 2 minutes was like, we could make, in a half hour, change the configuration of this machine and save this person 2 hours of work every day.
Yeah.
Then you start putting an hourly rate. It's like just that answer by itself and getting people to answer that way because nobody wants to say this is what I hate about my job. They don't want to say it at their job. They wait till they get home to do it. But good managers and good leaders, they want to hear that. Like, how can we improve? How can we get better? It's, it's you've got to create that environment where you're depending on your employees. You shouldn't be depending on them to do work for you. You should be depending on them to collaborate with you because they're depending on you to collaborate with them.
Sure. No, I think that role of being an outsider, but listening and giving recommendations and understanding, take your time to understand, but being outside is huge. And that's what basically branding is. Branding is somebody else's perception of your business.
Yep.
That means branding lives in somebody else's brain, not in your own brain.
Yeah.
That's why it's really hard for us to, define who we are because we're biased, because we're inside us.
Yep.
So when you are in the bottle, you cannot see the label.
Right.
But in order to understand somebody's brand, when I'm working on projects, I need to listen, I need to see things, I need to ask questions. And then from outside, I tell them, this is how people see you.
Yes.
This is how I see you. But the key thing is that you have to earn the trust so they really value what you're saying.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it is one of those things that if you were to ask me what I wanted from every client or what my goal is to provide them that trust.
Yeah.
Like I want them to have the confidence of the things I say they don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
That takes time because it's, especially when it comes to money and finances, you really want somebody to be objective and looking out for the greater good. And when I say greater good, I mean looking out for the investment of that company.
Yeah.
So it takes time to build that trust.
Sure.
And I'd love to go work with a client and on day one, they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I don't have to worry about that thing. It doesn't happen in day one. By the time I finish an engagement or I get several months in, I usually get that call. Like, I'm glad you're worrying about that. I'm going to go work on this. And oddly enough, the fact that I'm worrying about those accounting and finance details, they're out creating value. I'm not creating value. I'm just making sure that piece is working so they can go out and create that additional value.
Sure.
We've worked together to identify how to create value.
Yeah.
But they go out and execute.
Well, and I will think it's a very important mission that you're doing because, any business that is financially healthy, it means that, it can function, right? And if you have, decent and responsible leadership, they're going to take care not only to their people, employees, but also their customers.
Right.
And a workplace is a place that you spend, at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks. Most of our lives are spent in a workplace.
Yep.
So by you helping businesses be healthy and then they do the right thing with that, with being financially good, that's improving people's life exponentially.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, Cass, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. So I enjoy our conversations.
Thank you, man. So far, you have added tremendous amount of value to my life and my business, and I'm very excited about seeing your future and what you're doing. And I look forward to stay in touch and help each other.
All right, thank you. Same here.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and Osa Studio at osastudio.com and follow us on Instagram at the Power of Design podcast. Thank you.